Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Principles and Policies of Low and Moderate Income Solar. This webinar is presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, as part of the U.S. Department of Energy Solar in Your Community Challenge. My name is Nate Hausman. I'm a project director here at CESA, and I will be moderating this webinar today. Today's webinar is one in a series of 8 individual presentations. These webinars are free and available to the public. They are particularly geared towards participants in the Solar in Your Community Challenge. For those of you who are participating in the Solar in Your Community Challenge, I want to let you know about an important resource we're offering, virtual office hours. All of our instructors for this webinar series will be made available for one-on-one consultations. To learn more about this and to schedule a consultation, you can contact the presenters directly using the email addresses you see on your screen. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Melanie Santiago Mosier. Melanie is the Program Director for Low Income Solar Access at Vote Solar, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to bringing solar energy into the mainstream. Prior to joining Vote Solar, Melanie led the government affairs efforts for organizations such as the Maryland Public Service Commission and the Washington Gas Energy Services after serving as counsel and policy analyst for the Maryland General Assembly. More recently, Melanie served as a regional policy director for SunEdison. She's an attorney licensed to practice law in Maryland and holds a JD from the University of Maryland School of Law. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Melanie. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody out there. I am absolutely thrilled to be invited by the Clean Energy States Alliance to join this webinar series. The Solar in Your Community Challenge is just a fantastic program, and I can congratulate all of you for being a part of it. As you develop your solar projects and models to meet your goals under the challenge, I hope that you'll make community engagement a key component of your plans. Community engagement is really important for successful low and moderate income solar deployment. And so today I'm happy to share some thoughts on the topic. To start off, another introductory word about Vote Solar. Vote Solar is an independent national nonprofit organization. We are an advocacy organization. So we focus on state-level policymaking and regulatory work to bring solar into the mainstream and make it accessible for all. Vote Solar started our low-income solar program about 2 years ago with the goal of partnering with and empowering low-income communities to be a part of the transition to the clean energy economy. Today's topic on engaging LMI communities comes at a really opportune time. More and more disadvantaged communities across the country are expressing a desire to be a part of the clean energy revolution. So for solar providers, this presents a tremendous opportunity to engage with and to partner with those communities. Successful community engagement can facilitate more solar deployment, more diversity and inclusion among solar's customers, and even more diversity and inclusion among the solar employment sector. So thinking about what we're going to talk about today, we've got 2 main learning objectives and 2 main topics for our conversation. So first, I want to talk about the why. The first learning objective is to understand the need for community engagement. The second learning engagement goes to the how. So for the second part of my presentation today, I want to share some tips and insights about how to effectively engage with LMI communities. So the headline of this slide comes from a real event. So years ago, a utility developed an energy efficiency program for low-income residents. And then this utility sent workers out into the community to sign up the customers. Well, the customers were very skeptical about what they were being told, and they were upset that they hadn't been consulted first about some new program offerings. Also, they just didn't really trust their utility as a messenger and as a provider. So the utility actually ended up dealing with a picket line of angry customers. All of that could have been avoided if the utility had thought through some ways to engage with the community and figure out what was best for the community and what they wanted from the outset. But simply avoiding the picket line really isn't the goal. The real goal, and the way solar providers will maximize value, is by fostering community empowerment. To get there, effective community engagement is needed to overcome challenges that providers face when interfacing with LMI customers. So first off, there is a high level of customer skepticism. Customers in low-income communities have been targets of scams for decades. You know, somebody coming to their door, or a mailer, or some kind of marketing piece that promises lots of benefits, a no at a little cost. Bam, that's going to encounter a high level of skepticism from customers who've heard it all before. Second, low and moderate income households may be multilingual or multicultural. The traditional sales force out there in the solar array arena who works with more traditional solar customers just may not be equipped to engage with customers in another language, or they may not be equipped to respect cultural differences. Third, LMI communities just may not even see solar as something that's for them. They may see solar as something that's really for rich people, and so really just overcoming that expectation is a key priority. Fourth, energy matters may just be a low priority for low and moderate income families who may have other pressing needs, like groceries, like medicine, like rent. And fifth, the cost of enrolling low and moderate income customers into solar projects can be high, and those expenses can be tied to overcoming the previous barriers. All of these different challenges point to the need for engagement with trusted community leaders and organizations early on. So Rose McKinney-James is a pillar of leadership in the clean energy world, and she has tremendous insights about the value of effective community engagement. She moderated a community engagement panel last year that Vote Solar and Grid Alternative sponsored, and she wrote the article linked on this slide as a follow-up to that panel. I just want to read one sentence from this phenomenal article. I hope you have a chance to read it, because I think this sentence really encapsulates why community engagement is such a valuable thing to do. Direct collaboration with community leaders can provide America's solar industry with unique perspectives and opportunities to help it reach new customers, strengthen its position on regulatory issues, and drive economic growth in all our communities. So I want to take a minute to unpack here what she says about why community engagement is so important, because that one sentence really discusses a lot of different components. So first, she talks about the bottom line. Reaching new customers and gaining new perspectives are strategies to grow the industry in a way that incorporates more diversity. Research has proven that growing diversity drives more innovation, and that in turn drives more growth and financial strength. Second, she talks about political realities. The solar industry has sat back hard against claims that certain incentives like net metering benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor. Now, there's data out there that shows that that's not necessarily true, but that argument has really pointed to the need to expand solar's reach to low and moderate income communities, and that really points to the value of engagement with community leaders and community organizations. Third, Ms. McKinney-James talks about economic growth for everyone. So this isn't just a financial imperative, it's a moral imperative. As we grow the clean economy, we must include opportunities for vulnerable communities. These are communities who have suffered tremendous harm from over a century of fossil fuel-based electricity and who deserve an opportunity to benefit going forward. So now that we've talked about the why, let's talk about the how. I'm going to go through 5 strategies for effectively engaging with LMI communities and building trust. So most of these tips are in the handout that was included in your syllabus, and these tips are also outlined in Ms. McKinney-James's article as well. So first, tap into existing community organizations and think about non-traditional ones like faith-based organizations or civic organizations or even fraternities or sororities. Seek out leaders of diverse organizations on the local level. So first, find organizations that already have a trusting relationship with their communities. Start building trust with the leaders of those organizations as a starting point. Second, include many voices in their decision-making processes. So collaborate with diverse communities when you're thinking about what you need to do to get approvals for your project. But this also goes to including diverse voices when you start thinking about your project and start planning it. Make sure that people are at the table and understand your goals and that you understand their goals. Third, focus on building long-term relationships. Don't limit your interactions with community organizations and community groups to times of crisis when you need support for an issue. That is the hallmark of insincerity. And I want to stress that. The message here is make sure that you're doing this in a sincere manner. Do this for the long term. Fourth, work with community organizations to design and collaborate on projects that focus on the community's needs. Consider elements that relate to energy justice. So as you plan and design your projects, work with local organizations to make sure that the projects will fit their needs. And when we talk about energy justice, that's a loaded term, but think about things like opportunities to build wealth in the community. Think about how you might be able to provide access to jobs relating to your project among community members. Think about how your project might be able to be turned into an asset ownership opportunity for different community members. And fifth, provide more education and data about solar's benefits to lower income communities. Work with local organizations to educate customers. Show the real risks and benefits for low-income communities and communities of color with visible examples. So education and real facts are key. Working with local organizations to educate LMI customers about the real risks and the real benefits of solar is a way to build trust. And the key point here is that solar may not be right for all LMI consumers. Working with local organizations on education should focus on helping LMI customers understand whether your solar offering is right for them and fits their needs. Don't use these community-based relationships and interactions to make a hard sale. In your syllabus, there were a couple of other resources that highlighted some examples of very effective community engagement and partnership. So I hope that you have a chance to read, if you haven't already, the excerpt from the paper that had a case study about clean energy deployment in Oakland, California. And also take a look at the slide deck that was created by the representatives of the Illinois Solar for All Working Group. Those both encapsulate some really, really good stories and really, really good tips for building community partnerships, building trust, and making sure that community voices are at the table when it comes to decision making. What I've got for you on this slide is actually a snapshot from the Illinois Solar for All slide deck that's in your syllabus. I wanted to point to this slide in particular because I think this one lays out a really good process for how to build strong community partnerships. This slide was actually put together to talk about a successful legislative campaign, but I think the ideas here apply to project development as well. So first, identify your essential partners, your essential participants. Who are those community groups and community leaders that you should have at the table and be talking to? Second, develop a good process for discussing your project, discussing community needs, and figuring out how to bring everybody into alignment on the goals. Third, having a set of good guiding principles to guide your conversations and guide your project development, and that has buy-in from the community-based organizations, is a great way to go. Fifth, then you can start to build out your program details and build out your project. Understand that the work is ongoing. Again, this goes to making sure that your relationship is an ongoing relationship and that you have a long-term investment in these relationships in mind. And as you go, identify lessons that you're learning along the way. Identify sticking points in your engagement with local communities, and identify how to better engage with communities going forward. So I hope that today's webinar has been helpful in outlining why community engagement is important and offering some tips and strategies for your community engagement efforts. Please do consider Vote Solar to be a resource for you. We also have a low-income solar policy guide available at lowincomesolar.org. So finally, just best wishes to you all as you continue working on your projects for the Solar in Your Community Challenge. Nate, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Melanie. We've got some questions coming in. That was really helpful. Is community engagement just another term for PR?
That's a really great question. I'm glad that was asked. The answer, I think, is no. I think PR is one consideration for community engagement. But, I think, as I talked about, there are so many reasons to really think through and plan for community engagement. It goes beyond just PR. It goes to building trust. It goes to getting community buy-in and support for your project as you start to move forward.
Great, thanks. Here's a question that you talked about to some degree, but what type of messaging has been particularly effective for tapping into the motivations and appeals of low and moderate income consumers?
That's a really great question. So some messaging that has been very effective goes to opportunities. So low and moderate income communities are seeking opportunities for growth. They're seeking opportunities for wealth. And so talking about how solar could be an opportunity for financial relief, it could be an opportunity to provide a gateway to employment. Those kinds of messages, I think, resonate very well. It goes a little bit deeper than just you can save a little bit of money off your utility bill. And again, that's why community engagement is such an important piece of the whole messaging puzzle. It goes to a deeper need and a deeper sense of desire for bigger opportunities and a place within the growing clean economy.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that I think is getting at sort of the risk associated, that can be associated with going solar. How do you talk to the LMI community when there's so much uncertainty? And this person notes uncertainty at the federal level with incentives, but certainly there's risk involved in any kind of solar investment. Do you have particular strategies for talking to the LMI community about those?
Sure. The first strategy is just to be upfront and straightforward about what those uncertainties are. It certainly does complicate your messaging, but trying to tiptoe around the fact that those types of uncertainties exist is not the best strategy. So, it's about being straightforward and upfront from the very beginning. With that being said, I think that there are ways to talk about your solar offerings that can take those things into account and say, in spite of this uncertainty, we are prepared to, offer you savings of at least this amount, or that kind of thing. Again, but saying, that could change going forward, but this is what we believe can be the outcome for you.
Great, thanks. Here's a question that only sort of tangentially gets at community engagement, but maybe you'll take a crack at it anyway. What are the models out there that promote ownership for low and moderate income families and households? This person notes direct ownership, community solar, and co-op models are particular models. And do you have comments on sort of the constraints to these models, to growth of these models?
Sure. Well, I think the questioner got to it. There are different models. So thinking about, a single family, there are ways to help a single family own a solar array on their own rooftop. Thinking about community-based ownership is a little bit more challenging, especially when it comes to low and moderate income communities where financial challenges may play into the overall challenge involved. The questioner talked about a co-op model. That's a very interesting model, and if it can be developed in such a way that a payment structure versus the saving structure is affordable and achievable by the co-op members, I think that's a really very interesting and very promising type of model. There are other potential models out there that that may play on existing ownership models, so that may require finding some tax equity partnerships and other types of business partnerships where ownership could lie at the beginning with one of the entities and then revert after a period of years to the community-based organization or community members. So I think there are a number of different types of models that can work. Certainly the financial challenges are, probably the paramount challenges involved in developing those community-based projects.
Thank you. One key challenge can be getting around the cost barrier in conversations with low and moderate income customers. How do you confront that or work around that, or how do you approach that?
That's an interesting question. So certainly low and moderate income families are unlikely to have money set aside and money available for any kind of significant down payment for a solar offering. So I think one way to get around that is to look at your own project model and look at your own financial model as a provider and figure out a way that you can make the offering with low or no down payments on behalf of the customer. That may be very, very challenging based on your own financial structure, but I would encourage you to seek out financial organizations who may be willing to provide backing for you and to provide some support such that you can make that kind of offering. Again, though, in terms of overall messaging with customers, it's about talking about the various different types of benefits as well. So cost and finances certainly are a top-level concern, but keep in mind that low and moderate income customers actually have a desire to be a part of the clean growing economy. And talking about how engaging with your solar project can help them, really get involved and be part of a cleaner environment and a cleaner community. And those kinds of messages, I think, can also help to overcome that initial hesitance when it comes to the finances.
Great. So here's a question. You have a limited budget for a project. Is community engagement an expense you can sort of gloss over, overlook? And the second part is, for the LMI community, for programs, it seems like there is there can be a high cost associated with outreach and engagement. Does that make these programs more expensive to operate?
Those are great questions. So I'd say the answer to the first question is, is it something you can skip? Is it something you can gloss over? I would emphatically say no. Build community engagement efforts into your project planning. The expense, I think, really kind of depends on the approach you take and, you know, kind of how deep engagement you want to do with the community, and what kind of resources might already exist in the community that you're targeting. Ideally, community engagement may not have to be that expensive. You know, you may be able to have good conversations with community-based organization leadership. So, you know, it doesn't cost money to have a meeting and build trust and have conversations with faith-based leaders and other community organization leaders. The investment right off the bat is in time. Now, you may want to make more investment into materials. Materials development was discussed in a different webinar, and I won't go into that here. But you know, materials may play a part in your community engagement. That's something you might want to consider. But I would encourage you to consider time as a key investment in building relationships with community organizations, in helping to frame your project, in helping to design your project, and making sure that you have community trust and a community voice at the table.
Thank you. Maybe we'll do just one or two more questions. Here's a question that has to do with ownership versus financing models, and trying to understand the pluses and minuses for the low and moderate income customer. Specifically, you know, solar can be certainly an asset, but it can be challenging for maintenance, and you know, it can even be a liability in some circumstances when a system is directly owned. On the other hand, some of the financing models have their own consumer protection concerns around low and moderate income customers, and challenges associated with long-term duration of contracts and the like. Are there particular, I mean, do you see direct ownership models as being more promising than some of the financing models, or vice versa?
I actually think each type of model has, as you said, its own pluses and its own minuses. Direct ownership is great. That ensures that, you know, all of the benefits of the solar array go directly to the customer, and that's ideal. However, the financial challenges to making that a reality are very real, and need to be considered very carefully. So I do think that there's value in third-party ownership and financing arrangements if they're done with care. So I like to point to the SASH program in California as a model of a program that has actually been able to incorporate both direct ownership of a system by the customer, but also that program accounts for and allows for third-party based ownership with like a PPA model. In establishing and allowing for third-party ownership and financing, the SASH program has actually outlined a series of 12 different consumer protections. So first, the provider has to ensure that the customer achieves tangible economic benefits, and under the SASH program in California, that's actually a 50% savings off of their bill. And there are other consumer protections involved as well, like inspections of the systems, making sure that the work is done effectively, and so on and so forth. So I think that there are good ways to do both. I think that third-party ownership and financing is an important way to overcome financial challenges and also take advantage of tax benefits that may not otherwise be available.
Thanks, Melanie, for that excellent presentation, and thank you to everyone who attended this webinar.